This is January 18th, 2008 in Rotterdam, New York at 11:30 a.m. June and Ken Hunter are interviewing Angelo Goffredo, who served in the United States Navy from July 17, 1946 to July 22, 1950. Please tell us your full name and when and where you were born.
My full name is Angelo Goffredo, also known as Guffy. I was born in Schenectady, New York, on the 12th month of the year, the 17th day in 1927.
And did you enlist or were you drafted?
I graduated high school June 26th, and then July 17th I was in the Navy. I enlisted. I was drafted to join the Army, but I wanted the Navy and I enlisted into the Navy.
And why had you chosen the Navy over another branch?
It was just something I always wanted. I was always wanted to see the sea, which everybody talked about. Up until that time I hadn't traveled too much, and I figured the Navy was the branch of service to get some traveling in. And I never regretted a day of it.
And where did you report?
I reported to Bainbridge, Maryland for 22 weeks of boot camp. At the time, it was a very, very strict boot camp. I found it very strict, as I said a little while ago, and Walter Winchell at one time called it the Navy concentration camp. But only for the simple reason they were trying to instill us that this is military service and the strictness is going to make you a better sailor. I never regretted a day. As a matter of fact, they cut our hair, as we all know, when you go into service. I was the only guy that could come out and part my hair.
How was that?
Because it grew so fast that I could part my hair, but not only that, I had a friend who was a barber, and he took care of me pretty good.
What was a typical day in the basic training like?
Basic training, we got up at 5 o'clock. We had to make sure our bunk was made. We had to clean the barracks. We had to line up for chow. We marched to chow, sit down for chow. We were out of the chow hall maybe 7:30 and had a report for duty at 8. At 8 o'clock they started our routine of military marching, which was about 3 or 4 miles every day, and then part of that day we would go to one of the Quonset huts, which were in Bainbridge, and they teach us how to use firearms, which the Navy very seldom uses, but we were taught how to use firearms.
Did you have to go through a fire safety training?
We eventually, one day in a week, we all had to go through the whole fire situation as to how to put out different types of fires with water or with foam or whatever the preventative was, and it was actual fire that we put out, but it taught us how to prevent fire. God forbid if we were aboard ship and it had to be put out, and we were given complete instructions as to how to put out a fire at any different location, which I guess I never had the opportunity to have to do that. But I did it in boot camp, and I always had that knowledge in the back of my head.
Did you have to take a swimming qualification test?
Yes, I did, and I have an experience which I am not proud of, but it's a joke right now. We went to the swimming, to the pool, and we had to swim 75 yards, and also we had to jump from different platforms. Well, when we jumped from the platform, you had to jump like you had a life jacket on, and you put your hand across here and put your nose over there. Well, I was an avid swimmer and I loved to swim. I used to dive off at a stone quarry up here in Schenectady. I used to dive. So when I got up on the tower, which was about 18-20 feet off the pool, I just decided to jump in, and the instructor says, "Goffredo, get up here." Climb the ladder, go up there. "How were you told to jump in?" "Like this, sir." "You know what that means? Hold your nose and hold your life jacket and jump." So I jumped. Goffredo, get up here. Hold your nose and hold your life jacket and jump. Well, after about the 7th or 8th time, I knew how to jump and I never did it again. But he was to prove to me that that is not the way to jump. And in the swimming, they taught us how to take our cambray shirts and tie the bottom, hold it by the neck, and jump and use it as a float when you got into the water. Which doesn't seem funny. It seems funny at the time, but it was a lifesaver if you ever had to use it when you had no life jacket. So I don't regret anything in boot camp. As I say, they said it was one of the toughest boot camps in the country, but I was very eager to learn and become a Navy sailor, and I did everything I was told.
Did you have to do the traditional KP duties?
KP duty, absolutely. I was one of the fellas that had to peel potatoes for about 4,000 guys. We used to have to get up at 4 o'clock and sit in front of the basin, and with a little paring knife, you sit there and peel potatoes. And that was our duty for one solid week. Every man that goes through boot camp gets KP duty one way or another.
So all these men who are in the Navy know how to
peel potatoes. Oh, well, they're not potatoes, they're spuds, of course, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that was, and like I say, I do not regret one day of boot camp.
How long was boot camp?
Boot camp was 17 weeks. As I recall, it could be 1 or 2 weeks off, but I'm pretty sure it was. I went in July, and I didn't get out until October, I beg your pardon. October, yep.
And then where did you go after that?
Then from boot camp, I went, matter of fact, I was assigned, when I got in the Navy, when I signed up, what kind of ship do you prefer? So I was always told that regulations on big ships were very, very strict and stern. So he says, try and get yourself a small ship. I put in for a DD or a DE. Well, when the time came, I got my orders. Please report to USS Missouri in Norfolk, Virginia. I went to Bainbridge. They shipped us down on a ferry. And I said, this is no little ship that I put in. This is one of the biggest in the Navy, which it was. So instead of putting in for a little, I got the biggest one. And to this day, I never regret a day. I'm so happy that happened. Because from the Missouri, I have made so many, many, many good buddies, shipmates. And to this day, some of us are still together in an organization called the USS Missouri Association.
We'll talk about that later.
Right.
Now, what did you feel when you saw this big ship? And tell us a little bit about this ship. Describe it.
When we went aboard ship, they had a whaleboat take us out to the ship because she was anchored out. She couldn't tie up to the pier that was usually hers because there was another big ship in her pier at the present time. And they carried us out. I got aboard ship at 8 o'clock at night, actually 2000, which is Navy talk. And they brought us down to the chow hall. We got to the chow hall. There must have been 30 or 40 of us that were reporting at the same time. I wasn't too satisfied for the simple reason I wanted a small ship, and here's this big monster that looked like there was no end on either side. So they took us to the chow hall, and this I will never forget until the day I die, is they fed us meatloaf, which had been saturated in grease and frozen. I would not eat meatloaf for about 20 years after that because it was not appetizing to look at. But either you ate it, I ate it not because I wanted to, because I was hungry, but I had about 4 or 5 pieces of fruit that night, and that was my supper. But it was for me and everybody else. And I got aboard ship at 8 o'clock, 2000. I didn't have a bunk. I didn't have no mattress. I slept on a piece of canvas. I get up, I get shaken one night, that same night, my first watch aboard the Missouri, my first watch. Goffredo, get up. You got the anchor watch. It was this boatswain mate Collins, I'll never forget him, with a nice, soft voice almost. He says, Goffredo, get up to the bridge. I says, I don't mean to be rude, what is the anchor watch? He says, you go up to the bridge. I says, where the hell is the bridge compared to the compartment I'm in? So he says, I'll show you, and I went up to the bridge and I had to run messages for the captain. That was the first night aboard the ship. I had a 12 to 4. As you sailors know what 12 to 4 is. And I hate to say this, my last night in the Navy, I was OD, and my last watch was 12 to 4.
OD, for the people don't know,
when I was in the barracks getting out of the service, I was being mustered out.
And that was officer of the deck.
That was officer of the deck, right? But it was a 12 to, my first watch was 12 to 4, and my last watch in the Navy was a 12 to 4. I got off watch at 0400, and I was discharged at 0800. I had everything packed and ready to come home.
What about a battle station? Where were you assigned?
At the battle station, at first, I was in the 5-inch 38s. As a matter of fact, those were the twin 5s. I was on the starboard side. I was in Sky 1. And I was upper handling room loader of the 5-inch projectiles. And I never was in battle to use them, but I was in battle in participating in naval maneuvers down in Vieques in the Virgin Islands. And the first time I heard that 5-inch go off, I thought my ears were going to pop. But eventually you get accustomed to it and you start putting cotton in your ears because you couldn't take it. Which will relate me to a story. We were down in Vieques and they fired the 16-inch guns which the Missouri had. I'll never forget this. I was sitting in the head, as you sailors know what the head is, and turret 2 fired, and I literally was raised about 6 inches right off the trough, and I got so damn scared I didn't know what the hell that noise was, but they just fired the twin salvo 16-inch gun. What a noise you cannot believe. And a concussion, it just drives you nuts, you know, until you know it's coming. And I didn't know it was coming, so you can imagine the anxiety that went through me at the time.
Was your gun crew made up also of Marines?
The Marines took care of all the 20 millimeters and the 40 millimeters. All us Navy men took care of the 5-inch and the 16-inch guns. The Marines, and they had their own squadron. We had 75 Marines aboard ship, and they stood most of the dignitary watches, and they had their own compartment, and they took care of all the 20s and the 40s, as I recall. He probably had other duties that I didn't know about, but they were always the guard, stood by the captain or the exec or any dignitaries that come aboard. They were always there, which today they're still pride of the Navy fleet if you look at them as soldiers.
How many people could be on the Missouri?
When I was aboard, we had 3,100 sailors and Marines. Yeah, it was quite crowded.
And they didn't give you a nice tour before
no way.
You learned on the job.
I had no idea where I was. They brought me to a compartment. I don't know how I got there, and I'll never forget. You had to go down the ladder, and the ladder it's got to be about a 75-degree angle. And when you don't know where you're going, you can really get yourself a little bit racked up, if you know what I mean.
I'm sure you had luxurious quarters there to put your clothing and all.
I slept on the bottom bunk of 5. And one night, they took my chains, which hold the bunk up, and they tied them with shoelaces. So when I got in the rack, you know where I went. Right down on you know what also. But they broke me in. I was part of the crew after that, you know. And life aboard the Missouri, in my eyes, other than, like I say, I was in at the end of World War II and the beginning of the Korea War. It was one big group of buddies that you lived with, became your brothers, and to this day, some of them are still my brothers, as far as men go. And the Navy, I chose the Navy. I had what they call, excuse the phrase, a clean fart sacks and 3 squares a day. And our food was, they says you're going to eat beans every day. Well, I think I was the only guy in the Navy that went back to the chow hall for seconds on beans because they were like Mama used to make. Mm-hmm. Really, it was, to me, a very, very exciting time. I was very fortunate not to be in the war itself, but knowing the guys that had been, I could see where they could be devastating, and I was very fortunate. I was at that age that I wasn't old enough to see combat.
What was a holiday like in the mess hall?
Holiday routine is what we called it. Holiday routine. If we were out to sea, we could sunbathe. This is about the only time you could not be aboard the ship without a shirt on. And holiday routine, they always had a special meal. We had what we call a gidong stand. The gidong stand, we used to go get ice cream and we get buy bars of candy. And not only that, cigarettes were 10 cents a pack at the time, if we all smoked at the time, but today it's not, advisable. But anyway, holiday routine aboard the Missouri, we used to be able to go swimming if we were out to sea. They throw a cargo net over the side, and you were put into squads, and you were given a timetable to be able to go swimming. So if it was your squad to go over swimming, you climbed down a cargo net, and they had the Marines in whaleboats with guns, and they'd formed a circle on either the port or starboard side of the ship. And we used to go crawl down on the cargo net, and they get in the water, and you could just stay there and float because it's salt water. You just lay on your back and have to do nothing. But if there was any sharks in the area, the Marines with the guns would take care of them, make sure that they were gone. I remember one incident, we were down in the Caribbean, and you have to wait for the cargo net, to get back up if you want to go back aboard ship. Well, being not too tall as you could see, the cargo net, I was ready to reach up for it. At the meantime, the ship pitched to port, and the cargo net was about 5 feet up above my head. I couldn't reach it. I had to wait till the ship come back again to grab the cargo net, which a lot of us did, but it was a great time. It was a great time. But they made it very convenient for us. Like I said, I was very fortunate. It was between wars, and they made it very convenient and very relaxing for us at holiday routine. And the food was always something special.
Now, the rating that you had, how did you get trained for it, and how did you advance if you did?
Well, when I went in the Navy, I took what they called an Eddie test, which at the time I was a high school graduate, and you had to be a high school graduate just to take the test. I took a test for the Eddie test, which was to send you to Great Lakes, which is electronics technician school in either Chicago or Memphis, Tennessee. So I took the test, and I didn't have the qualifications to become an electronics technician. So what they did, when I went aboard ship, they put me in a deck force. And I was very, very fortunate that when I went aboard ship, I had almost 3.5 years to go on my service. Well, while I was on board, I was in the 5th Division on the Missouri, and I got this chief radio electrician, Jarvis, come up to me one day and says, "Goffredo, how would you like to get transferred?" I says, "Anything to get off this deck of swabbing the decks every morning at 5 o'clock. He says, "I'll see what I can do for you." Sure enough, he called me one day and says that, "I think I can get you transferred to the K Division," which was radar operator and maintenance. So I says, "I'd love it." Well, the transfer come true. I went down into K Division, and I'm only in the Navy 6-7 months. And being that I had still another 3 years to go, the division officer, this chief radio electrician, Jarvis, says, "I'm going to see if I can get you to go to school." They sent me to school in Norfolk, Virginia, Armed Forces Staff College. And we were the first class in radar maintenance and operation. I got to go to the school, and we were going to school from 9 o'clock in the morning to 12 o'clock in the afternoon, to 1 o'clock in the morning, to 5 o'clock in the evening. When got chow, went back aboard, went back to school at 7 to 9. I did that for 6 solid months. At first, when we first got there, we just went to school. We did no exercises or nothing. So what happened, they found out all us guys were putting on weight. I was about 137 pounds when I entered. I come out of there 165. And they see that I was eating very well because we were eating officer's chow because we were the first, until they set up the school with mess hall and everything else. They got us to where we were having exercises and training, and it got to where the guys weren't putting on all this weight. But when I went back aboard ship, I found out the K Division was divided into two divisions. It was either K Division, which was the operators, and the T Divisions were the technicians. Well, out of school I had a fairly good mark. And they said, which would you prefer? I says, I'd like to be the technician. So I went into the tech gang, and we repaired radios, sonar, Loran, and radar. And I got to become acquainted with all the equipment. The schooling was a great help to me because not only did it teach us the theory, it taught us how to operate and ways of preventive maintenance, which we had to do periodically. And it got so I was fairly decent at it. Well, while I was in K Division, the Navy came out with an all-nav that no ET training or advancement can be made to anyone without 42 weeks of school at Chicago or 42 weeks at Memphis, Tennessee, which I did not qualify for. So for 3 years, I became a technician. I did my job. I saw 78 men come through the division. Most of my experience is because I've had practical experience and taught many of these guys, these shipmates, how to operate and how to maintain and how our preventive maintenance schedule was working. Again, I got to say this Chief Radio Electrician Jarvis, who at the time was almost like a father to me at the time, being a young tender sailor. He got me permission from the Navy Department just to take the test for advancement to ET3, which is third class petty officer. And he got permission. I waited a month or so, and he gave us they got us permission for me to take the test. I took the test, much to my satisfaction. I passed it with flying colors. They gave me my ET3 rating, which I was not qualified for when I joined the Navy, which I feel proud to be able to say I've done that. And not too many guys can say that. You went in the Navy not qualified and come out qualified. And thanks to the Navy and its ET3, in civilian life, it helped me in many, many ways.
I'd like to go back a little bit. There's a tradition that they have in the Navy. When you were on the deck force, on the big ships, they had wooden decks. How did they take care of those wooden decks?
On our ship, all the decks on the main deck in the O1 and the O2 level. Matter of fact, on the O1 level is where the surrender plaque was. For people who are not familiar with the Missouri is the ship that in Tokyo Bay on September 2nd, 1945, the official award of the war of the Allies had ceased. And all the Japanese dignitaries and all the American dignitaries with General MacArthur came aboard and signed a peace treaty that ended the World War II. That plaque was still up on the O2 level on the starboard side, and completely surrounding that deck, that plaque, and all the decks below were teak wood. The teak wood was hard as rocks and very, very durable, but even durable things break. So what they did, in order for us to maintain it, we used to have what they call holy stone, and any sailor who's holy stone know what I'm talking about. What they used to do was take a brick of this sandstone and chisel a little hole in it and get a broom handle. And the sandstone was about 4 inches wide, maybe 6 inches long. And you put that on the deck and you throw sand and soapy water, and one board at a time you holy stone the deck at the count from the boatswain mate, who would go start 1, 2, 3 to the left, right, left, right, left, right. You did that 15 times in a span of maybe 25, 30 feet because there'd be 15, 20 sailors there. And we get that deck pure white. Did that at least once or twice a week. and you get up and your back was broke, but the deck was nice and shiny. And to this day, they still think that the teakwood is on the Missouri, which is stationed in Hawaii. It was, like I say, I had quite a... Another thing, I got one, it was a good occasion. Every sailor who's been in the Navy know what chipping and painting and chromating. And we were, when I was in the deck force, I learned how to chip, paint, and chromate and everything else. We were up near the bow where the bow was curved inward. So when you put a stage up to paint, you were straight down. You couldn't reach the ship. So the buddy of mine and I, we had the paint buckets and our brushes, and we were supposed to spot paint. Well, spot paint is when you chromate a certain spot and then you go over and paint it, so you didn't have to paint too much. Well, spot painting, we didn't know. He told us to get over the side and start painting. So this buddy and I got on our stage, which is about 6 foot long and is hanging from the stanchions up above on main deck, and we couldn't reach it. So we started swinging like we were on a swing until we got up next to the ship, and he had eyelets. You had to tie yourself off. You're sitting at a 60-degree angle and you're trying to paint. Well, what happened, unbeknownst to us, we painted the whole side of the ship from the main deck down to the waterline, solid. And it was the cleanest part of the whole ship because the rest was all spot painted. And when he found out what we did, we got a little bit fanny chewing out, if you know what I'm talking about.
Now, on board ship there, did you have luxury of taking showers every day?
Oh,
what
yes.
about washing clothes? How much water were you allowed in the shower time?
Shower time, you're allowed X amount of minutes, maybe 5 minutes. And then we used to have what they call salt water to shower off with, which is not too good. But eventually aboard the Missouri we had clear water because we had our own evaporators, and they made their own fresh water for drinking. At first we used to use salt water, and then we could rinse off in fresh water. But it got after a while, when the war was over, the rationing of the salt water wasn't that predominant. We'd take freshwater showers. But it was at first a little bit itchy, if you know what I mean, when you got to wash up with salt. But we had stand-up showers. You're allowed X amount of minutes in each shower, so your buddy could take a shower after you, because you got 3,100 men that have to take showers. Not all of them do, but everybody, try to shower every day, And as far as the laundry goes, I was very fortunate. We could take, in boot camp, I washed all my clothes. Aboard the ship, they have a laundry, and you had your own laundry bag with your name on it, put all your clothes in, because every one of your pieces of clothing has your name engraved in it with a stencil that you put in before you, and you zip it to the laundry, and then a couple, 3 days later, you go pick it up and you'd have clean laundry, which was, as far as our blues and our whites, we send the whites to be washed, but we pressed our blues and our whites, we pressed them ourselves.
Aboard ship, they do the old Navy thing of putting trousers under the mattress and all the...
I tell you what I used to do also. When I was out to sea, I used to take my whites and I used to tie them with something heavy and throw them over the fantail and churn them up into the wake of the ship. It's like a wash machine about 100 times over. But we used to sit there, but you had to make sure you had a good and tied and something weighted down, or else they'd come up, they'd be ripped apart because of the churning of the four props. So we had the four props aboard ship. They were the height of two-story families, all four of them, and we had four. And when you get that thing kicking up to flag speed, you know that is being churned. So you had to watch what you do. But it saved washing them. But and not only that, but you brought a new pair of whites. They're a little bit rigid. So this way it made it nice and soft, and you want a nice pair of soft whites.
Now, what was a typical meal time like? A lineup for it? Did you go by sections? And also, what about church services? Were they available?
Every day, church services were aboard ship. We had a Catholic and we had a Protestant Jew, pastors, and they'd heard confessions, and we went to church, and they had church mass. Lots of times, if we were in warm weather, the masses would be held on the fantail, and for all denominations of religion. And it was, a lot of the fellows were former altar boys, and they served. And of course we've gotten communion, being that I was a Catholic. And when we were in port, if there was no church services, we were usually tied up away from an aircraft carrier. And we always got permission to go and hear services on one of the aircraft carriers. As I recall, the Roosevelt was tied up right alongside us, on the upside of the pier, of course. But we used to go to and hear Mass aboard the aircraft carrier, which I was very faithful to. I tried to be.
Did you have any kind of entertainment available?
Every night we had movies. If you're out to sea, we have it on the fantail. And our Gedunk stand was always open maybe a half hour before the movies, which was ice cream and candy, whatever you want. And we used to go down and buy ice cream, and they make sundaes for you, and they only cost you a nickel. And we go up and sit on the fantail. You go early. It's the only time you could sit up there with your t-shirt on without your full uniform. We were in full uniform, not full uniform per se, like our undress blues. We could wear clean dungarees, clean chambray shirts, clean hat. Your hat had to be white all the time, and we sit up there and watch movies every night. We had, aboard the Missouri, we had a 26-piece band who marched and played. And every night they give a concert on the fantail before the movie started. And we've had a lot of up-and-coming new movies aboard the ship, which were, as a matter of fact, one night I saw the Jolson story twice. Once on the beach and one on board ship. So it was very entertaining. They made it as pleasurable as you can possibly believe. And like I say, I don't regret one day aboard the ship in the Navy. Never.
Now that was the only ship you were...
That was the only ship I served aboard. 3.5 years. Outside of 6 months in school. But I was still assigned to the Missouri. Yeah, and we traveled all over the Atlantic and the Mediterranean. I have been to England. We used to take midshipman cruises. We'd go up to Annapolis. We anchor out, and we deliver maybe 2,000 cadets would come aboard ship. In the meantime, we had to give up our bunks because I was sleeping amidships. And some of us moved forward, some of us moved aft, so that the midshipmen can have our bunks amidships because of the wake and the pitching and the rolling of the ship to make it convenient a little bit more for them. I've seen many a midshipman sick over the side, tell me to die, I want to die, I want to go. But seasickness does that to certain people. But we used to do this every year. I did that for 3 years. And we wound up going to England, Southampton, England, been to London, went to the French Riviera. We pulled into Cherbourg, France. I took a 7-day tour into Paris, been into the Mediterranean. We stopped at Lisbon, Portugal. We stopped at Algiers in North Africa. I've been to Cuba about 16 times because that was the end of every cruise. We was wind up in Cuba for maneuvers or whatever the case may be. But with the midshipmen aboard, we were a little bit inconvenient, but they were very, very congenial, and they were our future officers, as people know. And it was different. We seen, which was very bad to do, but being a regular sailor, and you like to pull jokes on each other. We used to go up to a midshipman who was having a hard time with the weaving and the pitching. How would you like a nice greasy pork chop? Which didn't go over too big. But this is part of the Navy life, and probably after he got back, he probably wondered, well, it was just
probably a good share of the men on the ship had been through.
Like I say, we take anywhere from 1,000 to 1,500 midshipmen, every cruise. And they were all over, and it was an experience that I could never pay for in my life, for what I have done, where I've been.
Now, you didn't get sick ever on the...
I've never... My first cruise, I went aboard ship. I told you, matter of fact, it was Valentine's Day, October, I told you. And our first cruise was up the North Atlantic, up past the Arctic Circle. and the temperature was 35 below zero. The waves were pretty tough. We were not allowed on the O2 level because everything was solid ice, even though it was salt water, it was solid ice. And icicles were hanging from the lifelines. And I tell you, I got a little queasy, but I can honestly and truly say I never really got sick. And if I didn't get sick then, I never would have. But I will say this, the roughest ride I've ever had aboard the Missouri was going from French Riviera to Algiers in the Mediterranean. It was a bright, clear, sunny day, and the wind must have been 30, 40 knots. And the waves were 10, 15 feet high. And they were coming up over the bow as the bow dunked down into the water. And it was, and we had midshipmen aboard the ship. And again, I'll say 3 out of 4 of them all got sick. And again, we kind of ridiculed them. Thinking about it today, it was a real raw thing to do, but it was part of life at that time.
How did you earn liberty on board a ship?
Liberty was 3 sections, section 1, 2, and 3. And you get 2 out of the 3 days. Because one day you had to stay aboard ship. One day you had duties to perform, which were 4-hour shifts. And everybody not had to stand a duty watch, but you had to stay aboard ship. You were not entitled to liberty. But if we were in port, we were allowed to go on, because they used to have ice cream men come aboard, come on up here, and they sometimes serve hamburgers and hot dogs and ice cream and candy bars. We were allowed to get on a truck, we used to call it. And they'd come aboard the pier. We were allowed to leave the ship. You had to get permission, of course, to go down to the Guidon truck and come back up and serve your duty if the duty was to be aboard. Not that you had a specific job to do, but you had to be aboard.
Did you take part in provisioning at sea or offloading when you're coming into port?
When I was in the 5th Division, which was a deck division, when we were out to sea, we all used to control what they call the oil lines. When we were out to sea, we used to take on 1 million gallons of oil if we needed it. But then we would refuel the destroyers, and you had to control the oil lines going from one ship to the other, because when you pitch and roll, and if you're not pitching and roll at the same time, the oil pipes would go down under the water, and you had to put it on a davit and pull it so you try and keep them as straight and taut as possible. Well, one day we were transferring Admiral Smith. I will never forget this day. And I was on the line that was controlling a buoy, like a seat, that was transferring the Admiral from one ship to the other, where I think it was one of the cruisers. I'll think of the name later, but we were transferring from the cruiser to the battleship. And the ships were not coordinated with the waves, and the Admiral got a little dunking. But you had to pull him up quick, but he said that's part of the Navy. He says, I know what it's all about. And it made it a little bit more pleasurable, because figuring here we are, we dumped an Admiral into the ocean. But these are these little things you think about, and now that I'm talking here, I think of these little things that really happened that you don't remember.
I suppose to become an admiral, he'd been dunked a few times. Absolutely. It was, as a matter of fact, this gentleman, as an admiral, used to come ashore with us on the whaleboats. He says, I'm part of you guys. He was really one of the admirals, I guess. He must have come up through the ranks, because he might have been a sailor, then went to Annapolis and become an officer. But he knew what it was to be a sailor, and he was very good with it. Matter of fact, the same admiral, we met him in Cherbourg, France, and we were sitting at a little cafe outside having a drink, and he was walking in, and we started to salute him. He says, that's not necessary right now, we're having a good time.
Now, besides the official surrender and the signing ceremonies on the Missouri, which it was well famous for, there's one other thing that many sailors from the Missouri don't like to talk about, an unusual, embarrassing situation that happened to the Missouri.
Well, in February of 1950, We just come out of Portsmouth Naval Yard, where the ship was in dry dock for almost 3 months. They took all the barnacles off the hull. They scraped and painted it. It was sparkling. All the decks were polished. All the guns were all cleaned and all painted. We had maximum ammunition. We had maximum personnel. We had maximum small stores, maximum food. We were going to go down on a shakedown cruise after the 3 months in Portsmouth, which is the dry dock and the Navy Yard, repair shop, right across the bay from Norfolk. And we were on our way out to sea, and in Chesapeake Bay, of course, sailors know what buoys are, and you're supposed to be on a certain side of a buoy, red or green or whatever the blue may be, to tell you where we are. We were just outside of Norfolk Harbor. Unbeknown to any of us at the time, they were trying something new. They were taking sound waves off the shore, which calls flying blind. Flying blind gives you a radar signal that goes and hits the beach and comes back, and it tells you how far you are from the beach. Well, anyway, we, unbeknownst to any of the sailors, except for the officers of the ship, we were on the wrong side of the buoy and ready to kick up the flank speed. Much to my regret, and to announce that we went aground. The ship was kicking up the flank speed, and I was on the main deck at the time, and I'll never forget it. The ship vibrated like there was in a tumbler. In the outcome, there was a gash about 2 foot long, 2 foot wide, about 8–10 feet long in the hull of the ship. And as I quoted before, there was our normal weight was 45,000 ton. We were up to 53,000 ton when we had everything, maximum ammunition, maximum everything. All hands were called to general quarters. We had to unload everything. They took the oil off. They took all the ammunition off. Anything that wasn't secured to the deck had to be removed to try to lighten the weight of the ship. They had about, I may be wrong, 10, 15 tugs tied to our stern. To our bow. They were trying to use a wiggling effect. They had the tugs on the right side pulling at a signal. Well, first, before that, we tried something else, which a lot of sailors didn't know, and neither did I until the time. I don't know if you know what sallying a ship is. A sallying a ship is they got the whole crew on one side of the ship. We'll say they got us on, we'll start off at starboard, I will say. And at the sound of a whistle, we all ran to the other side, hoping that we could rock the ship. I don't think it even budged the 16th of an inch. So this didn't work. After trying for about 10, 15 times, finally it was giving up. Following day, all the tugs in port come out to meet us. They tied all the tugs up to the bow of the ship, and they put 4 or 5 on starboard, 4 or 5 on port. And what they try to do is pull the bow first to the starboard and then to port, back and forth at a signal. And they had the props trying to get to loosen us up, but the suction of the muck and mire in the harbor just was too great. So that was halted. They finally got, from what I understand, they finally got Navy divers. I think they came down from Philadelphia. They were going down every hour on the hour, different crew. From the Army they were, as I recall, and they were trying to break that suction of the ship that had devoured the hull of the ship. They did that for, you see, the 17th it happened, and I think it was 6 days later. I was standing on the fantail, and they said they were going to try and see if they can make another pull. What they did is they had 4 or 5 tugs up on the bow, 4 or 5 tugs on starboard and port, and they had about 6 or 7 tugs in the stern. And while they were wiggling us, they were going to try and pull us off. Well, I was a radio technician at the time. I'll never forget this. And we had station WNOR, which is a Norfolk affiliated station. And I set up a radio transmitter for this NBC commentator who was aboard ship to let the audience, the radio audience, know if the Missouri had gotten off the sandbar. Sure enough, at the NAS, which is the Naval Air Station, had a tower with a red light, and the light was blinking continuously 24 hours a day. And our crane that used to pick up our Kingfish seaplanes was right in line with, happened to be right in line with this tower with the red light. And as they were jockeying the ship back and forth, we finally saw the stern of the ship moving to the opposite direction of what the tugs were pulling us. And all the crew who was on deck let out with a roar. Finally, they pulled us off the bar, and all the Missouri crew elated. But previous to getting us off the bar, we were working almost 16 hours out of the 24, other than stopping for chow. And then the one day we did get liberty. They sent us, we got liberty, and they sent us ashore just to give us a little bit of relaxation. And everybody, you know, asked you what ship you were from. Being embarrassed by being aground, we used to say the Roosevelt or the Coral Sea or anything that was in port at the time, just not to be embarrassed because we took her aground. But today it's laughable, but at the time it wasn't. But they got us off the ground, and it really was a trying experience.
Mm-hmm. What was the payday like aboard ship?
Paydays, you went down according to divisions. And they had us all payday. When you went down to the paymaster and you lined up and you give him your security number, your military number, which 898-0694, I still remember it. And I went down and they handed you, you signed for it, and they give you your paycheck in, and we got it in cash, of course, $37.50, no matter at the time, but it was something. Which you didn't really need money at the time. Everything was given to you except for going on liberty. Mm-hmm. And it was, you know, being that I never really had a full-time job previous to the Navy, like this was money that I could do whatever I want with. And that felt like I was a little bit important. But that's what payday wasn't. It wasn't what you call scrambling. Guys they just took their time when you're in pay line. And you go to the paycheck. But 1986, I had the privilege of going back aboard the Missouri. And I went through all the decks again. Had been refurbished in Long Beach. I went aboard her in Long Beach also because we made a trip out there just to see her. When they refurbished her, when President Reagan brought her back in service. And then we went aboard ship. She was ready to be back into registry. I'm pretty sure it's 86. I may be wrong. But we went through they made us go through the chow hall. And I was with my wife. And they gave us a counterpart to the position that I had aboard ship. I had a young fella from New York who was also electronics technician. And he was so congenial that, forgive me, we had a counterpart who took me through the ship again, and they showed us what they modified and how good it was. And at the time, we used to go through the chow line, and you had to eat what they put on your chow, on your tray. Well, the Navy is different today. The only thing you go in line for is your entree, which is a choice of 3 or 4 meals, which I thought was excellent. You help yourself to everything else. It made everything so good. And this young gentleman, young sailor, he was so congenial. He took me to my old compartment. He took me to the old pieces of radar we used to operate that has been removed and improved in so many ways that the Navy today is such and such a great thing. Well, this gentleman, this young sailor who was so good, I was ready to disembark from the ship. And of course, I hugged and kissed him. And on our way off the ship, he stood there and he saluted me and says, "It was a great pleasure to know you." To this day, I still think of it.
Now, what about on board ship? Did you dread having to hear the word inspection, prepare for inspection?
Inspection was very, it was planned. They notify us there'll be inspection such and such a day and such a time. Inspection, you dressed up like we were, sometimes in undress blues, sometimes in dungarees, sometimes in dress uniform. Of course you were inspected before you went off ship. If you had liberty, you had to look the side, you looked the part. And I will never forget one story. The skipper was inspecting us. It was a Saturday morning, and we were all dressed up in dress uniform. And at one time, there was a rumor going around that you could not have a beard. Well, myself and two of my other buddies grew beards, and they were neat and trimmed. And our division officer was a little bit peeved, but we still stood inspection. I'll never forget the skipper. He stood in front of me, he looked down, he looked up at me, he looked at me, and he looked back down again, and he said to me, "Nice shine, sailor," and went to my buddy and said the same thing. So as long as you were dressed neat, clean, and appropriate for the inspection, we very seldom had any problems. Very seldom.
So now, when did you leave the Navy? And
I left the Navy in July of 1950. As I stated before, my last watch in the Navy was a 12 to 4. I was a petty officer, so I had to stand what they call officer of the day watch in the barracks. But it was a 12 to 4. And then when I got out of the Navy, I come home. I had a 30-day leave, and I was elated to be home. Missed the Navy because I came home because my mom was ill. And I applied for a job at what they call American Locomotive Club, a company here in Schenectady. And when I went down there, I was very fortunate to get into the electric maintenance game. And then after that, they found out I had a few capabilities, thanks to the Navy, that I was an electronics electrician at the Navy at the ALCO for 11 years. And as the ALCO was being eliminated here in Schenectady, I went to work for an electrical contractor who taught me many things pertaining to physical electrical. I knew theory, but physical electrical. And then he made me very self-sufficient. And then I went out and became an electrical contractor on my own, which I've taken 15 men at one time and made electricians. And it was known as Goffredo Electric, which I raised my son to do. And to this day, he still carries on the Goffredo Electric construction company.
now you mentioned that you're very active in the unions and so forth.
Well, one thing when I was at the ALCO, was in the union. But when I come out, there was one thing that I found out from a fellow sailor, that the Missouri group in 1976 started an association, which I was so darn interested in, that the first reunion was held in 1975 in New York with 35 members. John Finn, who was a shipmate whom I did not know, I became acquainted with, started the Missouri Association with 35 members. They had a dinner dance, and this grew because he was a truck driver, and every place he went, he left signs. Join the USS Missouri Association. And to this day, we're 2,100 strong. That's just members without, not including their wives. And we've been getting together since 1976, and we have meetings, 4 meetings every year, and 1 big reunion every year. And we've been all over the country. Again, I thank this to the USS Missouri and the United States Navy.
And are you in any other military type
At the present time,
activities?
no, I'm not. I am very, very active in the Missouri Association. I've held almost every office, and I still do whatever I can. And it's not an association. It's a family, and the weave of a needle that is sewn between us is because of the USS Navy. Because they're all such great guys.
No.
Now, at the conclusion of this, we will, if you'd like, we'd like to take some pictures of your memorabilia.
I would love to have you take them because it is something that I treasure every day.
And thank you very much for your service to our country.
It's my pleasure to have you here. I feel like I'm living my life all over again.
Now, held in your hand is an unusual keepsake that you have. Would you tell us about this?
Well, when I was aboard ship, of course, there was a lot of things thrown on the deck, especially shells that are all coming off a projectile that was been fired or whatever. And we were in dry dock, as I told you before, in 1950, and they were replacing all this deteriorated deck. The deck itself is made of teak wood, and it's one of the hardest woods in the world. Well, when I told you about holy stone on the decks, this is the wood that we holy stoned, and it's so hard and durable that it is very useful aboard the decks of the Missouri, which was all teak wood. But anyway, this is a piece of the Missouri from 1950. This is the original deck that I took upon myself. I made a little souvenir for myself. I got the Missouri plaque that sits on the O2 level, the signing of the peace treaty, and this to me is a keepsake that I'll have for the rest of my life, and I hope my family also. But the deck itself is the color of oak, and all sailors know that we only had black shoe polish aboard the ship, and I rubbed this with shoe polish maybe 100 times. That's why the color is what it is. And I'm very proud of it, and I just can't tell you how much it means to me.
Ahead of us, I see a model of a ship. Can you tell me about the ship?
That's the ship. That's the complete replica model of the ship, brought down to scale. I forget what the scale was. I have a nephew who knows I am very, very interested in the Missouri. That ship, if you are not familiar with, is 889 foot long. It's 118 inches on the beam, 118 feet on the beam. Its water line to the deck is 43 feet. It has 9 16-inch guns. It has 10 mounts of 5-inch 38s, and it can kick up to a speed of 30 to 35 knots, which is pretty fast when you're kicking it up. But that ship could really cruise, and when they kicked it up to full speed, the wake would come up right to the edge of the main deck. I cherish it, and my nephew made that for me, and I'll always love it.
We're looking in here at the corner. There's a picture of, it looks like flame all around the ship.
That is a 9-gun salvo fired from the 16-inch guns. And it's just a picture that if you were standing on the opposite side of what they were firing, that ship would move anywhere from 25 to 50 yards to the opposite side from the concussion and the force of those 16-inch guns firing those projectiles. The projectiles were almost fired a 16-inch salvo. You knew that the ship was going to move to the opposite direction because of the force of those bullets or those projectiles being fired out of the 16-inch guns.
I imagine those shells had to be handled by machinery.
They were all handled by machinery, yes. We loaded them aboard ship, rolling them like a barrel of whatever, but when they were put into the 16-inch gun, everything was done mechanically. And three powder kegs, and then a projectile, and of course rammed and closed and then fired.